Thanks for being here on this Sunday. That's a live look at Paris at this hour, and the reason we're looking at it is because the CIA director is there meeting with officials from Israel, Egypt, and Qatar. They are reportedly negotiating a deal that would secure the release of more than 100 Israeli hostages in exchange for an extended suspension of war in Gaza. Something like 2 months seems to be what's on the table. Meanwhile, the United Nations today is calling on Canada, the U.S., and other Western countries to restore funding to UNRWA. That's the group that works in Gaza to help the Palestinian people, a UN group. The plea comes after Israel alleged 12 members of the relief agency participated in the October 7th attacks. The UN says most of those employees have been fired. One is dead, and they are still trying to identify the others. Secretary General Guterres, though, says any staff who participated in acts of terror will be held accountable. He says 2 million civilians in Gaza depend on aid, and that current funding will not allow them to meet their requirements by next month. Canada, one of the countries that decided to suspend funding. This comes, of course, on the heels of the UN's top court ruling Friday that called on Israel to take all measures to prevent any acts of genocide, adding also that hostages need to be released. It did not, however, call for a ceasefire. For reaction from the U.S. on the war in Gaza and growing conflicts in the region, I spoke to the Pentagon's press secretary, Major General Patrick Ryder, in a Canadian exclusive. Major General Ryder, thank you so much for making the time for us.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
I want to start, if I can, by the ICJ's ruling on Friday. The court ordered Israel to take measures to prevent and punish direct incitement of genocide, but it stopped short of calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. I wonder whether that adds any pressure to the United States in what it is calling for in Israel.
Well, first of all, we, of course, appreciate the court's efforts to look for peaceful outcomes to challenging situations around the world. When it comes to Israel, our relationship with Israel, of course, is longstanding. It's a deep relationship, and we certainly support Israel's inherent right to defend itself from terrorism. And as you know, they were brutally attacked on October 7th. And so we will continue to support them in those efforts. That said, we also continue to consult very closely with our Israeli partners and expect them to take civilian safety into account in conducting their operations and ensuring that those operations are conducted in accordance with international law. And so we'll continue to have those conversations and continue to encourage them to ensure that civilian safety and humanitarian assistance is taken into account.
Can I ask you then whether the U.S. military has seen a change in the IDF's approach to Gaza that would indicate to you that they are trying to better protect civilians?
Well, certainly in our conversations with them, they have indicated that they are taking steps to take civilian harm mitigation into account. We have seen them change some of the approaches that they're taking on the battlefield in Gaza. That said, again, we are certainly aware of the continuing reports and concerns regarding civilian harm in Gaza, as well as the ability for humanitarian assistance to get into that area of the world.
Let me ask you about the U.S. airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen that we've seen over the past few weeks. This, of course, a response to what we were seeing in the Red Sea. Canada, part of that response, a small part of it. Are the strikes achieving their intended goal?
Well, it's a great point, and just again to provide your viewers with some context here, as you know, back in mid-November, we started to see the Houthi militia groups conducting attacks against international shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And despite multiple warnings from the international community, to include 14 nations plus the United States in early January, asking the Houthis to stop these attacks or else there would be consequences, they have continued. And so, of course, there are consequences and there are costs. And so to answer your question, yes, these strikes are intended to disrupt and degrade their ability to conduct these kinds of attacks. Clearly, they continue to have capability, but we do assess that we have degraded their ability to do these things. That said, we're going to continue to work with the international community to achieve the goal that we've set for ourselves here, which is ensuring that the Red Sea can be transited safely and securely by international shipping and that the lives of mariners are not put on the line. And so we continue to call for the Houthis to cease these reckless and illegal attacks, and we'll continue working with our international partners toward that end.
Canada offered up 3 Canadian Forces members. I wonder whether you think that that is an adequate contribution, or whether the Pentagon would have liked to see something more significant.
Well, we have over 20 nations that have signed up to participate in Operation Prosperity Guardian, which is the defensive coalition aimed at safeguarding international shipping and mariners. And it's up to every country to contribute what they can. I think the important point here is that these attacks are not attacks against one country alone. So far, over 50 nations have been impacted by these Houthi attacks. And so it's an international problem that requires an international response. And certainly, as an American, we greatly value and appreciate Canada's contributions, but also as an ally and as part of an international coalition, certainly we very much appreciate everything that Canada does to help the world and to help safeguard this important international waterway.
There were also U.S. airstrikes in Iraq this past week in response to attacks against U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria by Iran militia-based groups. I wonder about that and what's happening with the Houthis, and whether you think at this stage, whether you'd be comfortable saying that the U.S. is in a proxy war with Iran.
No, we are not in a war with Iran. We don't seek to be in a war with Iran. We don't seek conflict with Iran. The United States, for a very long time, has had national interests in the Middle East region and has worked very closely with our partners throughout the region to ensure the safety, security, and stability of a very vital part of the world. And that's not going to change. I think what you're seeing here is Iran and its proxies attempting to exploit the current situation, the tensions in the Middle East, to accomplish goals that they've set for themselves long before the Israel-Hamas conflict. And so as we saw that conflict kick off, the United States deployed a significant amount of military capability into the region to serve and support our regional deterrence efforts, but also to be available to respond to a variety of contingencies. And so that's what you're seeing play out here.
Let me end, if I can, by asking you about Ukraine. This past week, Secretary Austin had a meeting with Ukraine's Defense Contact Group. The Pentagon usually announces aid packages for Ukraine at these meetings, but of course there wasn't one because that aid remains stalled in Congress. What impact do you think that is having on the ground in Ukraine? Do you think that it will change sort of the length of this war and whether or not the Ukrainians can progress, given that nothing is coming at this stage?
Well, a couple of things there. First of all, ultimately, the Ukrainians are going to be the ones to determine, the outcome of this conflict in terms of, whether they're going to be able to continue fighting. And if past is precedent, clearly they are innovative, dedicated, courageous fighters, and we have no indication that they're going to let up when it comes to defending their country. To your point, we certainly want to continue to support Ukraine in the way that we have since Russia's illegal invasion, and we'll continue to work with our Congress to get the funding that we need to be able to support them. But what I'd say also here is it's important to understand that this is not just the United States. You have an international coalition, more than 50 nations that continue to work together on a monthly basis to ensure Ukraine has what it needs to defend its sovereignty and defend its citizens.
Do you think, though, that Ukraine is running low on ammunition because of what's happening in the United States? I should say there's also problems with money getting unblocked from the EU and other places, but is that a concern for you on the ground?
Well, I mean, certainly, as this conflict continues to move forward, it's vital that we get ammunition, that we get air defense capabilities, that we get armor, training, continue to provide Ukraine with what it needs to defend itself. But Ukraine has shown that don't count them out. This conflict is, tragic, but Ukraine has been very, very innovative and courageous in how they've defended their country. From a United States standpoint, we're committed to continuing to support Ukraine. And I think it's also important to understand here that if Russia is allowed to win, if they are allowed to eliminate Ukraine as a country, the security implications, not just for Europe, but for the entire world, are stark. So it's very important that we continue to support Ukraine going forward.
Major General Ryder, thank you for your time. Come back anytime, sir.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.